So I granted myself some time to fully submerge myself into the Lightfall expansion before providing my thoughts. There will be spoilers ahead, so if you haven't touched Lightfall, this is your chance to turn around. Though overall, I do enjoy the expansion. It's definitely no Witch Queen, that's for sure, but it's definitely not as bad as Shadowkeep either. I think it's just a little bit beyond light, if I could say anything about it. There is quite a bit of pressing issues that deserve addressing before kind of continuing, but in my opinion, it's an alright story campaign. I enjoyed it overall, despite the most pressing issues being prevalent in the expansion. So for starters, I really enjoyed the legend difficulty and pressure involving the solo story campaign. The difficulty was definitely a lot harder than Witch Queen's in my opinion. Missions like Downfall and Headlong were definitely quite my highlights. Their levels provide a fluid mix of boss placement, an appealing tile set, combined with much more smaller convex places of cover that really you have to move around in. This kind of added to the challenge and immersion with the moment-to-moment gameplay, in my opinion. The Tormentor's presence was also very enjoyable for me to fight against, especially when they spawned in these small enclosed spaces. Whilst being an equally challenging boss enemy, you have to aim in these certain crit spots to damage them properly and avoid like their very own finisher. This kind of added to the enemy archetype in my opinion, and I hope that they're not a one and done campaign thing. They add a lot of challenge to the game that I really think that I feel was kind of missing a little bit in Witch Queen. Though unfortunately I can't really say the same thoughts involving the story. There are three major plot points within the series that begin in an enticing manner, but then seem quickly smashed together as if they were one huge car accident. For starters, we have the impending threat that is the Witness and the Callous, with the Guardian attempting to stop its plan, the interactions with the two Neomine Cloud Striders that are defending the city, and Strand with the Veil packaged along with it. Now, each plot point was trying to vie for your attention, and because of that, they equally became fragmented as a result. I would love to know more about the subclass that Osiris is harassing me to improve upon, but I gotta deal with Nimbus's and Rohan's problems before we could ever continue further. I would love to learn about Rohan as a character that we're supposed to get better acquainted with, but he was hastily removed as a plot point to rev us up for Strand. Speaking of, while I did enjoy my time with Strand, I would have loved to learn about it as well as the Veil. However, when we get to the Veil, we see a mere glimpse of it and literally learn nothing else about it, as we have to now manage the Witness's disciples shortly afterwards, which essentially concludes the campaign. So, as a result, we have a fragmented storyline that couldn't make much sense if it tried. Now, I know people will point their fingers and say that the Strand plot point does override a fair bit of the story, which to an extent I do agree with, but this is not their first rodeo with a subclass. Say what you want about Beyond Light, but how they treated the Stasis subclass storyline was amazing and still felt structurally coherent. Now, I would love to hope that the raid and seasonal content will provide the exposition that is lacking within this content. However, the best case scenario comes with a slew of issues, as you have essentially locked out said exposition for the campaign it was originally supposed to be in. Now, for Strand, despite a bit of the story suffering from a bit of hypersaturation of what I dubbed the Strand training arc, the subclass was amazing during the story campaign, even exhilarating even. The Threadweaver Super was nothing but satisfying, grappling was amazing and felt great to traverse with, and the suspend on our dodge was quite intuitive. However, the moment the campaign ends and it's time to put some legwork into the class feels very underwhelming post-campaign. During Lightfall, I was having extreme trouble with the Headlong mission. However, I used Assassin's Cowl in combination with Strand in order to create an invisible Strand puppeteer, able to soar and melee across the battlefield, collecting tangles while I was invisible, making it easier for me to manipulate Strand in such a manner. Cooldowns were at an all-time low, and the abilities had much more impact on enemies within the campaign. This progress pushed me to use Strand all the way up until the final boss. After the final campaign, I excitedly wanted to try and recreate this. The overall effectiveness instantly showed itself. The cooldowns of the abilities are extremely long. It's harder to use in heavier content, especially if you're not using Woven Mail. And whilst I disliked the way how Strand ended up being, I can't fault Bungie for taking this decision. This is what we wanted. How, you might be wondering? Well, during the time Stasis was released, we cried for nerfs when it came to PvP, and nerfs they delivered. Unfortunately, these nerfs made their way into PvE, and Stasis was an echo of what it was formerly. And yes, Stasis was extremely insane in PvP, but it was just PvP. PvE, however, was just fine, and the adversity was very heavy, and Bungie wanted to maintain class identity between the game modes. The point is this: we pushed our reception on Stasis, and they took it into account when creating this subclass. That much is obvious. Stasis is most definitely underwhelming, but we as a community voted for it to initially be so for the sake of preserving the PvP sandbox overall. Let's hope that the feedback that could potentially buff it makes it into an amazing subclass, especially paired with the fact that we finally have access to all class fragments now. However, if I were Bungie, I would personally ditch this unification effort of maintaining the class identity throughout the entire game and tune PvP and PvE's desires accordingly. However, with this said, the activities are quite fun outside the initial campaign. Terminal Overload is amazing and a challenging replayable activities. The Hall of Heroes quests are also a decent time killer if you have anything extra to deal with. I am soon to touch ground on the Hard Partitions quest, but will soon. The exotics are very fun. Quicksilver's Catalyst is encouraging me to make a video, encouraging people to at least try it out. Though overall, this expansion is good. It just missed the mark we were expecting after Witch Queen. And so I hope that the seasons will help pick up the pace later down this year. But that's the overall opinion piece on Lightfall in general. Touched on all the points that I wanted to. So Alchemist, out.